Don't start that podcast or even look at another microphone until you know these things. Hi there, it's Sewa from She's Off Script Media, and I want to see your podcast succeed. After 5 years of hosting my own podcast, 179 episodes in, I've noticed there are a few things people don't talk about when it comes to how you should start and grow a successful podcast, which is why I put together a list for you today. Now, it's important that you know these things because you want to avoid a phenomenon called pod fading. And that's a trend where people don't make it past the first episode of their podcast. In fact, 87% of the millions of podcasts out there aren't even producing new episodes. So if you don't want that to be you, here's the first thing you should consider. Ask yourself, why are you trying to create podcasts? Now, there are three main categories people fall into when they're creating podcasts. First, it's a hobby. It's the modern day version of a garage band. You want to get together with your friends and chit chat about whatever it is you're into and share that with the world. Number two, it's a part of your business. This is a part of your funnel where you want to create a space where your potential clients can get to know you. Third, this is a way for you to build a personal brand, and you simply want to build an audience and help them get to know you better. Now, for example, if you are well-known consulting company McKinsey & Co. They have a podcast, and if you've ever listened to it, this is where they are sharing the research that they've come out with. They're sharing the outcomes that they've been able to achieve for their clients, and their podcast is their way of letting potential future customers know that they can be trusted and know that they can get them results. So that is the function that the podcast serves. So if you're looking to launch a podcast, know why you're looking to launch that podcast, because depending on which one of those three categories you fall into, your approach is going to be entirely different. You're going to structure your content differently, and your level of investment is going to be different. If you are a business that's already generating millions of dollars, it's nothing for you to go into a podcast studio, have fancy equipment, have fancy microphones, have fancy cameras, because you are generating revenue, and this podcast is only going to help you make more money at that level. Versus if this is a hobby for you, you are going to start at an entirely different level when it comes to your equipment. So know why you are starting the podcast. Next, you should know, what is your podcast about? Who is it for? And is there an alignment between your subject and the audience it's intended for? So if you intend to start a podcast to talk about any and all things, one day you're talking about gaming, the next thing you're talking about New York Fashion Week, the next thing you're talking about personal finance, you are going to confuse people, because while there might be people like you who are interested in all of those different subjects, it's going to be very difficult to target the right kinds of people to grow an audience with. So you need to be absolutely clear. So for example, you could start a podcast about mirrorless cameras. You are passionate about all things cameras, and there are other people in the world who are just as passionate about not only the technology, but also your perspective on the technology. So there's an alignment between what you're passionate about and love talking about and other people in the world who want to hear it. And the great thing about knowing who your audience is you know where they hang out online, and you're able to market to them in the future. And we'll talk about how to market and grow your podcast later on. Next, you'll want to know the structure of your show in advance. This will not only help you because you know what you're going to be doing every single time you sit in front of the microphone, but it will help your audience get comfortable because they know what to expect from you. So think through whether or not this is going to be an episodic type of podcast where every week or every month you have episodes and you're only going to do 10 of them per season. Think through that. Next, you'll want to know the structure of your show in advance. And there are a few things to consider here. First, is this going to be a daily, a weekly, or a monthly show? Are you going to have it be episodic, meaning that you'll have 10 episodes for a season and that's all you're doing? Knowing that in advance helps you really see the light at the end of the tunnel. It gives you a goalpost so that you know this is exactly what I need to work towards, as opposed to just recording whenever you feel like it and there's no end in sight. Also, you want to consider whether it's going to be just you and a co-host, or are you going to have an interview style format where you'll be interviewing guests? Think about whether your show is going to have segments. I think this will help you to break up the show so you only have to come up with micro pieces of content as opposed to a whole show. Last but not least in this section, are you going to have an audio only show or a video plus audio show? I'm biased towards audio shows simply because when I started putting my video podcast on YouTube, I started to see exponential growth with the show as opposed to just having the show on audio only platforms where discovery isn't the best. They're still working on the SEO capabilities of shows on Apple Podcasts and platforms like that. So for now, discovery isn't that great, but a platform like YouTube where your podcast can be discovered as well, I see nothing but the plus side of adding video to your podcast. Next, think about how you're going to monetize the show, which means how do you plan on making money? Now, depending on how you're approaching podcasting, it can be time intensive, labor intensive. And if you're spending money on higher end equipment, it can cost you quite a bit. So how are you going to recoup that money and make profit on top of that? Here are 3 ways you can consider making money. And don't go straight to advertisers because at this point, you are not big enough to make it worth it for them. They will need to see tens of thousands of podcast downloads before they will even look at advertising with your show. So don't start there. First, try affiliate income. What that means is if you have any products or services that you can recommend to your audience, if they have an affiliate program, every time you recommend it and someone clicks on your link in order to purchase, you will get a cut of whatever they spent, of course, at no additional cost to them. So this is a great way for you to share your passion and products and services that you are genuinely excited about with your audience while making money from those as well. For example, we had Maya Puerto Real on the show. She owns Kitten Co Jewelry. Now, she and I took the same ads course and we talked about it during our episode together. And a few of you started asking in the comments about the ads course because you were interested in taking that course as well. So I put an affiliate link in the description box. And now every time you guys click that link and purchase a Boost course, I get a cut of that as well. So think through the things that you've genuinely used for yourself and recommend those to your audience. Next, you can create products. And by this, I don't mean merchandise because you may not have an audience big enough to buy merch from you over and over again in a way that will create profit for you. What I mean by this is creating digital and info products using whatever you are an expert at. You can advertise it and share it to your audience on your show, put it up on a site like Gumroad, and whenever they hear the episode, if they're interested in whatever you're selling, they can click that and purchase it. Also, if you want to create a service, it works a lot in the same way. You can provide consultations for your audience when they hear the episode. If they want to work with you in order to achieve whatever you talked about on your episode, they can click a link and work with you in that way. So there are ways for you to generate revenue without advertisers. Next, think about how you're going to grow the show. It's one thing to successfully start the show, but how do you grow it? How do you get your podcast in front of more than just your friends and family? And I would say this is one of the more challenging parts of having a podcast, especially if you start out with only an audio podcast. So I want to take a poll here. If you listen to the She's Off Script podcast, how did you find us? I'm very curious. Let us know in the comments. But here are a few ways that you can grow the show. The first way is sharing clips of your episodes on social media. I will say that doing this alone probably won't move the needle too much for you. What you want to do on top of that is genuinely engage with potential listeners in the comments section or in general on social media. Be genuine about the way that you are engaging with them so they can come back to your page and decide for themselves, looking at all the clips of your show that they've shared, whether or not they're interested in subscribing and becoming a listener. But you have to do this consistently on a daily basis in order to see the growth. But my favorite way of doing this is putting your podcast on an SEO-rich platform like YouTube. When you do this, people looking for a problem that your podcast solves, especially if you have put the right tags and you've titled it appropriately, will come across your podcast themselves simply because of the way the platform works. As it stands right now, the audio podcast platforms aren't very great for discovery, meaning that people aren't necessarily going on there and searching for solutions that they're hoping will be answered by podcasts. So you have to weigh audio only podcasts versus video podcasts that you can place on YouTube when it comes to growth and think through whether it might be worth it for you to take the additional time and effort to make your podcast a video podcast. Another way you can grow is getting featured on the homepage of Apple Podcasts. Now, that's not going to happen for everyone, and it's quite difficult to do. There's no straightforward algorithm or step or process you can take to getting featured on their homepage. But what we do know is your downloads and the number of reviews your show gets will help you not only rise through the rankings, but also get featured. So ask people to leave reviews. That's why podcasters are consistently asking you to leave them reviews, because this is important for discovery. So if you love a podcast, leave them a review, share it with someone else, and ask them to leave a review as well. Next, when you're starting a podcast, you need to leave perfectionism at the door, because your first episode is not going to be perfect. In fact, if you're doing it yourself, you will probably have some technical difficulties and glitches that you need to work through. As long as you improve every single episode, that is all we can ask for. The only thing I would tell you to make sure you get as right as possible is the audio, because if this is an audio only show, people will need to hear whatever you have to say clearly. Now, you can get clear audio by just using your phone. The mic on your iPhone is great quality. Start there and just make sure it's clean. But don't feel like you have to have the best quality of everything in order to have a great show, but just be committed to learning, read about it, watch videos on YouTube like this one about how you can improve your show. But as long as you commit to the craft and you commit to getting better every single time, that's all you need. Don't try to be perfect your first time out of the gate, because that just does not exist, and it's going to discourage you when things aren't quite going right. Be okay with shipping something that isn't perfect, because the world needs to hear the message that you have to share. So if you're interested in seeing all the tools, processes, and systems that I use to produce the She's Off Script podcast, watch this next video where I share everything. Good luck with your podcast, and come back in the comments and tell me about the show that you're launching. Bye.